My name is Gary Wilder, and I'll be reading from my book Concrete Utopianism, which is a finalist for the 2022 Big Other Nonfiction Award. We inhabit a paradoxical political present. It has never been more urgent to invent new forms of translocal solidarity oriented toward another possible world, yet it has never been more difficult to do so. Our bleak times have led a growing number of critics to treat the given as unsurpassable. This is an understandable, if regrettable, symptom of our world historical predicament, but it amounts to accepting the real as rational. It is one thing to recognize that the historical conditions that might once have allowed for a certain kind of systemic change have shifted. It is another to contend that such change is now impossible, that even thinking in such terms is anachronistic, misguided, or dangerous. This categorical pessimism perversely mirrors neoliberalism's end-of-history triumphalism, precisely when our times call for new practices of concrete utopianism in the service of new forms of left internationalism. This book unfolds from the simple proposition that there is only one world, and it is defined by uneven relations of inextricable entanglement. Emancipatory alternatives require planetary politics because the nexus of current and imminent crises poses a planetary predicament. The urgent need to envision other possible worlds raises questions about historical transformation. Political projects always presuppose certain understandings of time and history. It follows that if our now requires new political thinking, such thinking should also reconsider conventional notions of historical temporality. Accordingly, I suggest that left thinking should attend more directly than it has in recent decades to translocal solidarity and heterodox temporality. Doing so invites us to unthink many of the spatial and temporal provincialisms that continue to suffuse so much of our political common sense. Assumptions about the supposed unity of territory, culture, and consciousness, or the self-evident differences between past, present, and future subtend the conventional human sciences and the liberal norms that they presuppose and reproduce. Such assumptions are also embedded within influential currents of critical theory. Specifically, I critique what I call left culturalism, left presentism, and left realism. These intersecting orientations maintain a skeptical stance toward the prospect of societal transformation and planetary politics. They reproduce provincial assumptions about political geography, temporality, and identity. By treating places, periods, and subjects as self-identical, they obstruct our capacity to forge transversal political alignments in the service of other possible worlds. They mistake political imagination for naive optimism and utopianism for idealism. Negative critique is treated as an end in itself. Pessimism is conflated with radicalism. Fatalism wins the day. The recent tendency among critical thinkers to frame political differences in terms of pessimism versus optimism is at best beside the point, and at worst politically disabling. The task of critical analysis is to delineate the challenges that must be confronted and the possible pathways that could help emancipatory forces overcome the existing order so as to promote human flourishing on a planetary scale. It is a different, and I would argue secondary matter, whether we are optimistic that such pathways will be found, that necessary steps will be taken, that success is likely. To state the obvious, positive outcomes are never guaranteed, yet history continues to unfold and political horizons remain open. Certainly liberal optimism is implicated in the present impasse, but a race to the bottom among melancholic pessimists will just as certainly foreclose the grounded, imaginative, and visionary practical efforts without which there can be no prospect of moving beyond it. By identifying pessimism with radicalism, political realists seek to disparage utopian imagination as naive about or complicit with dominant power relations. We need to challenge the ways that realism can wield the shibboleth of optimism to circumscribe political horizons. The correct insight that new thinking cannot in itself change the world should not be used as an alibi for for renouncing the imperative to imagine otherwise. In contrast, I argue that the opposite of political pessimism is not optimism, it is concrete utopianism. By utopian, I mean thought and action oriented towards that which appears to be, or is purported to be, impossible, when such impossibility is only a function of existing arrangements. Concrete utopianism is not merely fanciful, phantasmatic, or speculative. It seeks to identify possibilities for alternative arrangements that may already dwell within or be emerging from the non-identical order that actually exists. Such utopianism also seeks to identify concrete interventions that point beyond the logic and framework of the existing order. Consider the ways that prison and police abolition, reparations for slavery, collective debt cancellation, or prohibition against fossil fuels are real possibilities that cannot be accommodated by the present system, whose realization would crack existing norms. They are at once possible and impossible. They presuppose a world that does not yet exist, even as they may help to propel into existence just such a world. Following Henri Lefebvre, we may understand concrete utopianism as a politics of the possible impossible.